The wagon wheel cracked against the trading post's splintered porch as Jeremiah Hawthorne shoved his daughter forward, whiskey fumes trailing behind him like a curse. 20-year-old Magnolia stumbled but caught herself, her amber eyes scanning the crowd of weathered frontiersmen and Apache warriors who'd gathered for the monthly trade at Fort Bridger's outskirts. "She's deaf as a stone," Jeremiah bellowed, his words slurring together. "Can't hear thunder nor whispers, but she works harder than 3 men. Take her off my hands for a good horse and I'll throw in her mother's silver locket." Magnolia's fingers instinctively moved to the small locket at her throat. She wasn't deaf, hadn't been since the fever broke when she was 7, but she'd learned that silence was survival in her father's house. Let him believe what kept his fists at bay. The Apache delegation stood apart from the white settlers, their presence commanding respect even in this neutral ground. Among them, one man drew every eye, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed carved from mountain stone. The warrior they called Ayana Takota moved through the crowd like a force of nature. His long black hair was woven with eagle feathers, and tribal scars traced intricate patterns across his bronze chest. "What? Use his broken woman to Apache?" sneered one of the traders, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Jeremiah's face reddened. "She ain't broken, just quiet. Does what she's told without complaint. Perfect squaw material, I'd say." The word hit Magnolia like a physical blow, but she kept her expression blank. Around her, crude laughter rippled through the white men while the Apache remained stone-faced. That's when Ayana Takota stepped forward, his moccasins silent on the wooden planks. The crowd fell quiet as he approached Magnolia, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart race. When their gazes met, she saw something unexpected, not the cold calculation of a man appraising livestock, but a deep intelligence, and what looked almost like recognition. "You trade daughter like horse," Ayana Takota said in careful English, his voice carrying the authority of a chief. "What kind of father does this?" "The practical kind." Jeremiah shot back. "I got 2 younger ones to feed, and she's just another mouth. Besides, you people love white women. Heard tell they make good slaves." The Apache warrior's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "We do not keep slaves. Whatever you call." Jeremiah waved dismissively. "Point is, she's strong, obedient, and won't give you no lip since she can't hear what you're saying anyhow." Ayana Takota moved closer to Magnolia, so close she could smell the sage and cedar smoke in his clothes. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper, his words meant for her alone. "I know you can hear me, little flower." Magnolia's breath caught, but years of hiding her secret kept her from reacting. Still, something flickered in her eyes, surprise. Perhaps even relief that didn't escape his notice. 2 horses, Ayana Takota announced suddenly, turning back to Jeremiah. "Strong ones, and silver for trade." The crowd buzzed with excitement. It was more than anyone expected for what they saw as damaged goods. "Done," Jeremiah agreed eagerly, already envisioning the whiskey he'd buy. "She's all yours, Chief." As the Apache warriors prepared to leave, Magnolia felt a strange mixture of terror and hope. She'd spent 20 years in her father's shadow, pretending to be less than she was to survive. Now she was being traded like cattle to a people she'd been taught to fear. But as Ayana Takota helped her onto one of the horses, his touch gentle despite his massive hands, he leaned close once more. "My name means eternal flower," he whispered in her ear, "and I have been waiting for you to bloom." The Apache camp lay 3 days' hard ride into the Colorado Territory wilderness, and with each mile that passed, Magnolia felt the weight of her old life falling away like shed skin. She rode beside Ayana Takota, acutely aware of how he positioned himself between her and the other warriors, not as a guard, but as protection. The other Apache treated her with a puzzling mixture of curiosity and respect. She'd expected hostility, perhaps cruelty, but found instead a quiet acceptance that confused her. When they made camp the first night, an elderly woman named Ista approached with food and warm blankets, speaking in rapid Apache while gesturing kindly at Magnolia. She asks if you need medicine, Ayana Takota translated, settling beside the fire. Says white women sometimes get sick from hard riding. Magnolia shook her head, then realized she was supposed to be deaf. But something in his knowing smile told her the charade was unnecessary here. Why? She asked softly, her voice hoarse from disuse. It was the first word she'd spoken in months. Why did you trade for me? Ayana Takota poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the star-filled sky. In our tongue, your name would be Sha'aha, little flower hidden in shadows. I have seen you at the trading post before. Her heart skipped. You have? 3 times. Each time I watched you translate for your father when he was too drunk to understand what was being said. Deaf women do not read lips in 2 languages. Heat flooded her cheeks. She'd been so careful, always keeping her reactions neutral, her face blank. How did you? The way you held yourself when the Pute chief spoke of war coming to the valley. Your father heard only meaningless sounds, but you understood the warning. I saw fear in your eyes not for yourself, but for others. Around them, the other Apache had settled into their bedrolls, but Magnolia felt wide awake for the first time in years. Are you going to tell them about my hearing? That is your choice to make. He met her eyes across the flickering flames. But know this among my people, we believe every person has a gift. Some are born to hunt, others to heal, others to see what is hidden. Perhaps your gift was learning when to be silent and when to listen. She thought of all the years she'd spent trapped between her father's rage and her own desperate need to survive. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like cowardice. The mouse who hides from the eagle lives to see another day. The mouse who runs into the open becomes food. His voice was gentle but firm. There is no shame in survival, Sha'oha. The next morning brought a surprise that would change everything. As they prepared to break camp, riders appeared on the horizon, a cavalry patrol from Fort Bridger, led by a young lieutenant with ambitious eyes and a disdain for treaty obligations. That stolen property you've got there, Chief, Lieutenant Morrison called out, his hand resting on his pistol. That white woman belongs with her own kind. Ayana Takota's warriors tensed, but their leader remained calm. Woman was traded fair, witnessed by many. By a drunk father who had no right, Morrison sneered. I'm taking her back to civilization, where she belongs. That's when Magnolia made the choice that would define everything that followed. Standing slowly, she moved to Ayana Takota's side and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture that spoke louder than words. I choose to stay, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the desert morning. Morrison's eyes widened. You can talk? But your father said, my father said many things that weren't true. For the first time in her life, Magnolia felt the power of speaking her truth. I am exactly where I choose to be. The lieutenant's face darkened. We'll see about that. This isn't over, Chief. As the cavalry rode away, Magnolia realized she just declared war on the only world she'd ever known. But looking up at Ayana Takota's proud smile, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Hope for a future of her own choosing. The Apache village nestled in a hidden valley where red canyon walls rose like protective arms around a collection of wickiups and cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed off the stone, and women sang while they worked hides and ground corn. It was nothing like the stories Magnolia had heard around Fort Bridger's saloon's tales of savage camps filled with torment and captivity. Instead, She found herself welcomed into the lodge of Ayanna Tekoda's grandmother, a tiny woman named Nasha, whose weathered hands held surprising strength. The old woman sized up Magnolia with sharp black eyes, then spoke rapidly in Apache. She says, "You have sad spirit but strong heart," Ayanna Tekoda translated as he ducked through the entrance. "And that white woman clothes will not survive one day of real work." Within hours, Magnolia found herself dressed in soft doeskin and learning to repair a torn water basket under Nasha's patient guidance. The work felt good, purposeful, in a way her father's endless, impossible demands never had. When she successfully wove a tight repair, the old woman nodded approvingly and spoke again. "What did she say?" Magnolia asked. Ayana Tekoda, who'd been sharpening arrow points nearby, looked up with something like pride. "She says your fingers remember what your heart forgot, that work should heal, not hurt." But their peace was shattered 3 days later when Lieutenant Morrison returned with a full company of cavalry and demand Magnolia recognized with a sinking heart. Circuit Judge Pemberton, known throughout the territory for his rigid interpretation of civilized law. "I have a writ here demanding the return of Miss Magnolia Hawthorne," Pemberton announced from horseback, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "She's been taken against her will and must be returned to proper Christian supervision." Ayanna Tekoda stepped forward, his warriors flanking him. "Woman came by trade. She chooses to stay." "A white woman cannot legally choose to live among savages," Pemberton declared. "It's against nature and God's law. Miss Hawthorne, you will return with us immediately." Magnolia felt the eyes of both camps upon her. The Apache women had stopped their work. The cavalry sat rigid in their saddles. In that moment, she realized this was about far more than one woman's choice. It was about power, about who had the right to determine another person's fate. "I respectfully decline, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is not a request, young lady. As a representative of territorial law, I'm ordering you to mount up. And I'm telling you that I'm a grown woman who has found a home where I'm treated with dignity." Magnolia stepped closer to Ayanna Tekoda, drawing strength from his presence. "I've committed no crime except choosing my own path." Judge Pemberton's face reddened. "You've been bewitched by heathen influence." Lieutenant Morrison, retrieve Miss Hawthorne by force if necessary. The cavalry began to advance, but Ayanna Tekoda raised his hand. "Wait." His voice carried absolute authority. "If white law says woman cannot choose, then we settle this by white man's challenge." "What kind of challenge?" Morrison demanded suspiciously. "Single combat. Your best warrior against Apache champion. Winner decides woman's fate." The judge looked intrigued despite himself. "What assurance do we have you'll honor the outcome? Apache word is good. Is white man's word equally strong?" Before anyone could object, Morrison stepped forward. "I accept. I'll fight your champion. Myself." That evening, as both camps prepared for the morning's contest, Magnolia found herself alone with Ayanna Tekoda beside the stream that ran through the village. The weight of what was coming pressed down on her like a physical force. "What if he wins?" she whispered. Ayanna Tekoda was silent for a long moment, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Then I will find another way to bring you home." "This is my home?" He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. "From the moment I first saw you pretending to be less than you were, you have been home to me, Cha-O-Ha. Tomorrow I fight not just for your freedom, but for our future." Dawn broke blood red over the canyon walls as both camps gathered in the wide clearing where the contest would unfold. Lieutenant Morrison had stripped to his cavalry trousers and boots, his chest pale against the morning sun. He was younger than Ayanna Tekoda, With the lean build of a horseman and the quick reflexes of a trained soldier, Ayanna Dakota wore only his traditional breechcloth and moccasins, his massive frame making Morrison look almost boyish by comparison. But Magnolia had learned enough about Apache ways to know that size meant nothing if speed and cunning were lacking. Judge Pemberton appointed himself referee, though his obvious bias toward the cavalry made the Apache warriors exchange dark looks. "This will be fought to surrender or unconsciousness," he declared. "No weapons, no interference from either side." As the two men circled each other in the makeshift ring, Magnolia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything, her future, her freedom, perhaps even her life, hung in the balance of what would unfold in the next few minutes. Morrison struck first, launching himself forward with the trained aggression of military combat. His fist connected with Ayanna Dakota's ribs, but the Apache warrior barely flinched. Instead, he caught Morrison's wrist and used the lieutenant's own momentum to send him sprawling in the dust. "Get up and fight like a man," Morrison snarled, scrambling to his feet. But Ayanna Dakota wasn't fighting like a white man, he was fighting like water, flowing around Morrison's attacks, absorbing the force and redirecting it. When Morrison charged again, the Apache warrior sidestepped and delivered a precise strike to a pressure point that sent the lieutenant to his knees, gasping. "This is how Apache hunt the bear," Ayanna Dakota said calmly, never taking his eyes off his opponent. Not with anger, but with patience. Morrison's face flushed with humiliation. Rising slowly, he pulled a hidden knife from his boot of violation of the agreed rules that brought shouts of protest from the Apache side. "Surrender now, or I'll gut you like a deer," Morrison threatened, the blade gleaming in the morning light. Judge Pemberton should have intervened, should have declared Morrison's forfeit for breaking the rules. Instead, he remained silent, clearly, hoping this turn would favor the cavalry's cause. But Ayanna Dakota only smiled a cold, predatory expression that reminded everyone present that he was a war chief who had survived countless battles. "Now you fight like desperate man instead of soldier. This makes you weak." What happened next became legend in both camps. Moving faster than seemed possible for such a large man, Ayanna Dakota closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. His left hand trapped Morrison's wrist while his right delivered 3 lightning-quick strikes, one to the throat, one to the solar plexus, one to a nerve cluster at the base of the neck. Morrison dropped like a felled tree, the knife spinning away harmlessly. He lay unconscious in the dirt, his breathing shallow but steady. "He lives," Ayanna Dakota announced, turning to face Judge Pemberton. "Apache keep bargain. Woman chooses." But Pemberton's face had gone purple with rage. "This proves nothing. No civilized court would recognize such barbarism as legal precedent." "Then civilized court has no honor," Ayanna Dakota replied. "Apache." Word was given. Was white man's word false? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the territorial government claimed to represent. Around the circle, cavalry soldiers shifted uncomfortably, some clearly uncomfortable with their judge's attempt to renege on the agreement. It was then that Magnolia stepped forward, her decision crystallizing in that moment of truth. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you've just proven why I could never return to a world that breaks its word when convenient." She walked to Ayanna Dakota's side and took his hand, her small fingers interlacing with his battle-scarred ones. "One choose my life, my love, and my people, and they are here." The judge opened his mouth to protest, but one look at the surrounding faces, both Apache and some of his own soldiers, told him this battle was lost. Sometimes even the law had to bend before the power of witnessed truth. 3 weeks after the combat, as autumn painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, preparations began for a ceremony unlike any the village had ever witnessed. Magnolia would be formally adopted into the tribe and wed to their war chief in a celebration that would blend Apache tradition with the recognition of a love that had grown from necessity into something profound. Nas Cha had taken charge of preparing the bride, her gnarled fingers working magic as she braided intricate patterns into Magnolia's honey-colored hair. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of beadwork and soft doeskin, created by the women of the village working together through long evenings filled with stories and laughter. Grandmother asks if you understand what it means to marry Apache war. Chief, Ayana Takota translated as he visited the women's lodge. His own preparation had been equally elaborate: ritual cleansing, prayer ceremonies, and the creation of new regalia that proclaimed his status as both warrior and husband. Tell her I understand it means I'll never be property again, Magnolia replied, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork. That I'll be partner, not possession. The old woman nodded approvingly when he translated, then spoke again at length. She says white world teaches women to be small, to hide their strength. Apache women are backbone of tribe. Chiefs listen to their counsel. Mothers choose the leaders. He paused, meeting Magnolia's eyes. She says you have learned to be small, but now you must learn to be mighty. The ceremony began at sunset, with both tribes gathering in the largest clearing. To Magnolia's surprise, several white settlers had come as well, traders who respected Ayana Takota, a few military men who had served honorably, and even some women from the nearest settlement who had heard her story and chose to witness this unprecedented union. Judge Pemberton had made his objections known through official channels, but Territorial Governor Evans had quietly let it be known that he saw no legal impediment to the marriage. The political winds were shifting, and public opinion had been influenced by the story of the cavalry lieutenant's dishonorable conduct spreading throughout the territory. The Apache ceremony was unlike anything Magnolia had experienced. There were no vows in the Christian sense, but instead a series of symbolic acts that spoke to deeper truths about partnership and commitment. She and Ayana Takota shared water from the same gourd, symbolizing that they would never thirst while the other had drink. They exchanged blankets, showing they would warm each other through all seasons. Most powerfully, they each placed a mastiti hand on the other's heart, while the medicine man spoke words that needed no translation, but it was the final element that moved Magnolia to tears. Nasha approached carrying a small pouch of seeds, corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters. That sustained Apache life. Plant together, the old woman said in careful English, gesturing to the rich earth at their feet. Grow together. Feed people together. As they knelt side by side, pressing the seeds into the ground with their joined hands, Magnolia felt the last barriers around her heart crumble. This wasn't just about choosing love over duty or freedom over security. This was about choosing to build something new, something that honored both their backgrounds while creating fresh possibilities. The celebration continued deep into the night, with drumming and dancing that seemed to connect earth and sky. When Ayana Takota led her to their new lodge, built specially for their wedding by the young men of the tribe, Magnolia paused at the threshold. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "Once we cross this threshold, there's no going back to the old world." He lifted her chin with gentle fingers. "Sa, oh ha. There has been no old world for me since the day I first saw you refuse to let your father's cruelty break your spirit. There is only the world we build together." As they stepped into their new home, wrapped in starlight and the blessing of two peoples learning to see beyond the boundaries of race and tradition, Magnolia felt the last of her old self fall away like a discarded cocoon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to love, hope, and the endless possibility of two hearts beating as one. Winter settled over the hidden valley like a soft white blanket, and with it came a peace Magnolia had never known. The daily rhythms of Apache life suited her in ways she couldn't have imagined, rising with the sun to tend the fire, working alongside the other women to prepare meals and repair equipment, learning the intricate skills that kept the tribe strong through the harsh mountain months. Her Apache was improving rapidly, much to Nasha's delight. The old woman had appointed herself Magnolia's primary teacher, and their lessons often dissolved into fits of laughter when cultural misunderstandings led to amusing mistakes. But it was the deeper wisdom that Nasha shared that truly transformed her new granddaughter. In White World, you learn to make yourself invisible, Nasha explained one afternoon as they worked together scraping a deer hide. Apache woman learns to see everything, hear everything, feel everything. How can invisible woman protect her? People? Magnolia paused in her work. But I thought being quiet was what helped me survive. Quiet and invisible are different things, child. Quiet hunter catches more game than loud one. But invisible hunter catches nothing because she never tries. The lesson proved prophetic when spring brought troubling news. A group of prospectors had established an illegal mining operation just outside the valley, and their presence threatened both the water supply and the delicate treaty arrangements that kept the Apache safe from military intervention. They must be driven off, declared Taza, one of the younger war chiefs, his voice hot with anger. Every day they stay, more will come. And if we attack them, cavalry comes in force. Ayana Dakota replied calmly. Then our people suffer for one moment of satisfaction. The council meeting stretched late into the night, with various factions arguing for different approaches. Some wanted immediate action, others counseled patience, and a few suggested abandoning the valley entirely. It was then that Magnolia made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. What if there was another way? She said quietly, rising from her place beside Ayana Dakota. The council fell silent. While wives were permitted to attend meetings, it was unusual for them to speak, especially one so newly married to Apache ways. The prospectors don't know I'm here, she continued, growing stronger as her idea took shape. To them, I'm just another white woman. What if I went to their camp? Absolutely not, Ayana Dakota said immediately. Too dangerous. But I could learn their plans, their numbers, maybe even convince them to leave voluntarily. She turned to address the full council. I know how white men think, how they justify taking what doesn't belong to them. Maybe I can use that knowledge to protect what we've built here. Elder Running Bear, whose opinion carried great weight, leaned forward. Young wife speaks with wisdom. Sometimes fox succeeds where wolf fails. And if they recognize her? Taza challenged. If word gets back to the fort that Ayana Dakota's woman was seen consorting with minors? Then we deal with that when it happens, Magnolia replied, surprising herself with her firmness. But doing nothing guarantees they'll keep expanding until they destroy everything we love. After much debate, the council agreed to let her try with strict conditions. She would go as a supposed runaway seeking help, would stay no more than 2 days, and would have warriors positioned nearby in case of trouble. The morning of her mission, Ayana Dakota held her close outside their lodge. I have never feared battle, he whispered against her hair. But sending my wife into danger feels like sending my own heart into the wolf's den. Then trust your heart to be clever enough to survive, she whispered back, and strong enough to come home to you. As she rode toward the mining camp in her old white woman's dress, hair pinned up in the style she'd worn at Fort Bridger, Magnolia felt like she was putting on a costume for a play. But this performance might determine the fate of everyone she'd come to love. For the first time in her life, her ability to move between two worlds would be used not just to survive, but to protect. The mining camp was a squalid collection of canvas tents and rough timber structures scattered along the stream that fed into Apache territory. Magnolia could see immediately why the elders were concerned. Muddy water ran thick with mining debris, and the constant noise of pickaxes and sluice boxes would drive away game for miles around. She approached the camp on foot, having hidden her horse in a grove of cottonwoods, affecting the desperate demeanor of a woman fleeing from captivity. It wasn't entirely an act. Her heart was racing with genuine fear as rough-looking miners stopped their work to stare at her approach. "Help. Me, please," she called out, letting exhaustion color her voice. "I've been walking for days trying to get away from them." A bearded man who seemed to be the camp leader emerged from the largest tent, his eyes narrowing with suspicion and interest. Well, what do we have here? My name is Margaret," Magnolia improvised, using her mother's name. "Margaret Williams. I was taken by Apache raiders 3 months ago. I finally managed to escape, but I'm lost and scared they'll find me." The miners gathered around, their faces showing a mixture of sympathy and the calculating look of men who saw opportunity in every situation. She could practically hear their thoughts. A white woman rescued from savages would be quite a prize. To return to civilization. "You poor little thing," the leader said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Cyrus Mitchell. We'll take good care of you, don't you worry." Over the next day and a half, Magnolia played her role perfectly while gathering crucial information. The miners were part of a larger operation funded by Eastern investors. They had claims papers that were technically legal but based on deliberately misleading surveys that placed them just outside the Apache reservation. Most importantly, they were planning to bring in hydraulic mining equipment within the month, machinery that would devastate the entire watershed. But her carefully constructed cover began to unravel when a familiar figure rode into camp on the second day. Lieutenant Morrison, his arm still in a sling from his encounter with Ayanna Takota, sat his horse like a man with a score to settle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his eyes locked on Magnolia's face. "Margaret Williams, is it? Funny. You look just like someone I know named Magnolia Hawthorne." The camp fell silent. Mitchell's hand moved to his pistol. "You know this woman, Lieutenant?" "Know her? She's the white squaw I've been tracking for months. The one who chose to live with those Apache devils instead of returning to Christian civilization." Magnolia felt the mood of the camp shift from protective to hostile in an instant. These men had been kind to a victim. They had no use for a traitor to her own race. "Is that true?" Mitchell demanded, grabbing her arm roughly. "You been living with them savages by choice?" There was no point in denial now. "Yes," she said simply. "I chose to live with people who treat women as partners instead of property." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming, sending her stumbling backward. "Ungrateful witch!" Mitchell snarled. "We should have let you stay lost in the wilderness." "Better idea," Morrison said, dismounting with obvious satisfaction. "Let's use her as bait. Send word to that Apache chief that we've got his woman. When he comes to rescue her, we'll be ready with enough firepower to end this problem permanently." As the miners bound her hands and locked her in a storage shed, Magnolia realized her mission had succeeded in ways she hadn't intended. She'd learned their plans, but now she was trapped, unable to warn her people of the ambush being prepared. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, she could see Morrison writing messages, preparing to spring his trap. Night fell with agonizing slowness, and with it came the terrible knowledge that her husband would come for her, walking straight into Morrison's revenge. Her only hope lay in the possibility that Apache warriors were already watching from the shadows, that her capture had been witnessed and preparations were being made. But as the hours crawled by, fear grew that this time love might not be enough to overcome the hatred and greed that drove men like Morrison and Mitchell. Dawn broke gray and cold over the mining camp as Morrison positioned his men in carefully planned ambush points. He'd sent an Apache boy from a rival band with his message, promising gold for the betrayal. "We have your woman. Come alone to the big cottonwood at sunrise, or she dies." What Morrison didn't know was that the boy had taken his gold but delivered a very different message, one that warned Ayanna Takota of the trap while revealing the exact positions of the hidden riflemen. Magnolia heard them moving into position from her prison in the storage shed. Through a gap in the boards, she could see Morrison checking his pocket watch with the satisfaction of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. "Your savage husband should be here any minute now," he called out to her. "Don't worry, I'll make his death quick before we turn you over to the territorial authorities." But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the camp, it became clear that something was wrong with Morrison's perfect plan. The appointed meeting time came and went with no sign of Ayanna Takota. The lieutenant's confidence began to crack as minutes stretched into an hour. "Where is he?" Mitchell demanded, his own nervousness growing. "You said he'd come for her." "He'll come," Morrison insisted, but doubt crept into his voice. "Apache are just naturally cowardly." That's when the first miner screamed. It started at the camp's perimeter. A fameter, brief cry of terror that was cut short almost before it began. Then another from a different direction. The carefully positioned ambushers found themselves becoming the hunted as Apache warriors, painted for war and moving like ghosts, began systematically eliminating the outer ring of defenders. "It's an attack!" Someone shouted, but the panic in his voice revealed the truth. This wasn't an attack. It was a reckoning. Morrison had expected one grief-stricken husband walking into a trap. Instead, he found himself facing a coordinated assault by an entire war party that had turned his own ambush tactics against him. Every hiding spot he'd chosen for his men became a killing ground as Apache warriors demonstrated why they'd remained unconquered in these mountains for generations. The chaos. Magnolia heard a sound that made her heart soar, the distinctive whistle Ayanna Takota used when calling to her across the village. She responded with their private signal, and within moments the shed door splintered open under the impact of a war axe. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, cutting her bonds with swift efficiency. "No, but Morrison has more men positioned." "Not anymore," he said grimly. "Apache do not leave enemies behind us when our women are threatened." As they emerged from the shed, Magnolia saw that the battle was already over. The surviving miners huddled in the center of camp, disarmed and terrified, while Apache warriors stood guard with drawn weapons. Morrison sat on the ground with his hands bound, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "You cannot do this," he raged at Ayanna Takota. "I am an officer of the United States Army. You are a man who breaks his word and threatens innocent women." The Apache chief replied calmly, "Your uniform does not make you honorable. What will you do with them?" Magnolia asked quietly. Ayanna Takota considered the question carefully. "White law says they have right to mine where they please. Apache law says they have no right to poison our water. Perhaps it is time for new kind of justice." What followed became legend throughout the territory. Instead of killing the miners and soldiers, Ayanna Takota gave them a choice: leave immediately and never return, or face trial by Apache law for their crimes against the land and people. Furthermore, they would spread word that this valley was under the personal protection of Chief Ayanna Takota and his wife, a white woman who had chosen Apache justice over territorial law. As the defeated men gathered their equipment and prepared to abandon their claims, Morrison turned back one final time. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Magnolia said quietly, taking her husband's hand. "It is." Watching the last of the miners disappear into the distance, she realized that her journey from silent victim to Apache wife and protector was complete. She had found her voice, her strength, and most importantly, her home. The valley was safe, love had triumphed, and two worlds had learned they could coexist when hearts chose understanding over hatred.